I think that's most of the holes that we've need to cut out for the chassis. So I think what I've got to do now is start mounting all the bits on here. Evening folks, and welcome back to the WTF Radio Shack. And this evening I'm going to show you the latest progress that we've been making with the LG300 transmitter. I've shown you in the last video what we've done with the power supply, and you may recall that we had some issues with the modulator. I tried to make a solid state modulator using a Burnett transformer and a MOSFET amplifier, but we had some issues with that. So I've now gone the route of a traditional vacuum tube valve modulator, which I have now built. Started that about a week ago, and that's all finished now, and I have to say it seems to be working. So I'm going to show you this. This is an 807 modulator, a pair of 807s in push-pull standard sort of configuration. Seems to work, and I've already had a few QSOs with this on the AM net. Originally, well, when I first connected it all up, had a few comments that it was not, well, I wouldn't say distorted, but probably could be better. I think that's the best way of putting it. So I've actually made a few modifications to that, and I'll show you that in a minute. I think what we need to do is just show you the actual circuit of that, because I think that's quite interesting, and then if anybody else is interested in building one of these, I can show you. You know, you can get some information as to where I got the circuit from, which would be, I think, be quite helpful. So without further ado, let's have a look at the modulator first, and then we'll have a look at the circuit. I've got the book open over there where it came from, and you can have a look. So this is my modulator that I built up for the LG300, and it didn't take too long to build actually. I was quite surprised. I think one of the advantages is that I've got a lot of junk in the shack, which means that I don't have to sort of order too many components for this. I did actually order a pair of new 807s, but everything else was sort of lying around here in the shack junk box. So this is the sort of outer appearance. I'll show you the underneath in a minute, and I'll just point a few things out. So we've got a UM3 modulation transformer, a Woden, and these are not that, there's a few of them around, but they're quite useful if you can find them. This one, well, these particular type of Woden modulation transformers are rated to about I think it's about 250 milliamps of anode current. So they're quite chunky, and they're quite probably, you could probably get away with a UM2 with this design, but I haven't got any UM2s. I had a UM3, so that's what I used. This is the heater transformer, 6.3 volts. This is another Woden actually, and this came out of it was a new old stock transformer, which I think is originally from some aircraft avionics or something like that, Cold War era sort of stuff. And this is a beautiful transformer actually. It's 500 volts. It's just got single secondary winding, 500 volts, and it's got a lovely, I can't really show it to you at the moment because it's on the other side, but it's got a lovely little brass plaque on the brass plaque on the other side, which has all the information about the windings. I mean, they don't make transformers like this anymore, that's for sure. And then this transformer here is a Parmeco 175, which supplies our HT voltage for the speech amplifier and also the screen grids of the 807s. So just a couple of other things. We've got a little meter there which is measuring the cathode current via a 10 ohm resistor. That's the way I normally like to do that, measuring cathode current. It's easier just to measure the voltage. That's a 500 microamp meter, and we're simply measuring, turning this ammeter into a voltmeter by measuring the voltage across a 10 ohm resistor in series with the cathodes of those two 807s. Quite a neat way of doing it. Saves you using complicated meter shunts, and it works very well. And then here, this one here is an ECC83 12AX7 speech amplifier, and then here we've got an ECC81, I think, a 1287, which is the phase inverter, and that's it. And this modulator actually works quite well. I've actually had a few QSOs with it, and since I've changed a couple of components, the audio reports have been quite favourable. So that's the modulator. We had to do away with the solid state, I'm afraid. We've gone back to traditional valves. I've taken the cover off this modulator so that you can have a quick look inside, and I'm just going to show you a few bits and bobs which are of interest. Now, a modulator is essentially an audio amplifier, and the construction of this, it basically follows the same rules as if you were building a music amplifier, hi-fi audio amp. So I'm just going to go around and show you a few things of note on this. I've just dropped my other screwdriver. Essentially, we've got two power supplies in this. This is the silicon rectifiers for the 700 volt supply, which is for the anodes of the 807s, and the primary of the modulation transformer. And then we've got another power supply board here, which supplies the HT for the speech amplifier and also the screen grid voltage for the 807s. Now, I generally don't tend to use chokes with my HT power supplies, especially if I'm using silicon rectifiers. Now, I think you can get away with using big chunky filter capacitors as opposed to, using a choke. A choke is fine, and I think if you're going to be using tube rectifiers, which don't really tolerate, massive amount of current, which would be associated with using big value capacitors, then you generally have to use a choke smoothing filter, with capacitances of about 10 microfarad or up to even 20 is usually acceptable. But with silicon rectifiers, especially these 1N5408s, you can really go to town on the filter capacitors. And so those two big ones there are in series, and I've got about, in total, 330 microfarad of smoothing capacitance for the main HT. Moving along, I'll show you a few other little things that I've done on this. So that's the modulation transformer, the Woden UM3. This little arrangement here, that's a gas discharge tube and a 1K snubber resistor, and the purpose of this is to prevent arcing, especially on the peaks of modulation. I've had problems with that in the past, and it's really just to protect the mod tranny. It does seem to work, actually. It's a little invention of my friend Ian, G6TVJ, and I hope it will save this mod tranny in case there's any mishaps, because they're quite rare. So down here is the speech amplifier, which is pretty much standard. or according to the circuit anyway. I haven't changed anything apart from these capacitors here. These microcapacitors are about 1800 puff. I think in the original circuit diagram they were of about 0.01, I think, as far as I can remember. And I had some issues with this modulator and getting it to sound good, so I changed those values of capacitors, and it seems to work okay. And what else? So that's the basis of the 807s. That's obviously the circuitry for the 807s. And then for the negative bias, I'm using just a single diode coming off the HT. And there's a Zener diode there as well, which keeps the voltage at about minus 50 volts. And apart from that, that's more or less it. If you're planning to build something like this, just a quick note of the layout. It's very important to have an earth bus bar. I mean, this is sort of standard practice for audio amplifiers, which is running along there and along there. And you've got to put all your earthing into one point along a bus bar if you want to avoid hum. So that's an important consideration. And I think apart from that, the rest of the layout is, you know, much the same as you do for any valve piece of equipment. So the circuit for the modulator came out of the RSGB handbook, which is the 5th edition. I think I bought this in the 1980s and find it quite useful. I'll just see if I can zoom in a little bit and then you can see what it's all about. I think that's more or less it. Now this modulator circuit, I believe, was originally labelled as a 140 watt modulator, or about 120, 140 watt modulator, which in its original form is way too much for an 813, a single 813. You don't need that much audio power. And as you can see, the original circuit uses a pair of TT21s, which I think are quite difficult to get hold of. I think they're quite difficult to find, actually, TT21s. But the rest of the circuit actually works very well. And I've actually used this design before. If you recall a few videos back, I built a modulator with a pair of Russian tubes, GU71s I think they were, and used that to modulate an 813, and that actually worked quite well. And I actually used this circuit diagram, well, certainly the speech amplifier and the phase converter. So this is described as a sort of a phase inverter, or a phase inverting, a floating para phase inverter and the speech amplifier. And then the next stage of the circuit of these next double triode is a simple voltage amplifier of the inverted phase. And I have to say, this circuit does work quite well. And it means that you can drive your output valves, you know, without the need to use a transformer, a driver transformer, and trust me, it does actually work. There's just a couple of things which you might want to consider if you're thinking of building an 807 modulator. These coupling caps are 0.01s, and I did actually use the suggested values there, and I found, well, the comments I was getting was that it sounded a bit crunchy. So I've actually changed those to 1800 PF, and I think the audio quality is better having replaced those coupling caps. The other coupling caps that they use here are 0.005s, and I think I've used 0.001, so 0.01s I should say, 0.01, 10 nanofarads. and they seem to work okay. So apart from that, and everything else is much the same. I've used obviously 807s in place of the TT21s, but apart from that, the rest of it is pretty much the same as the circuit diagram you can see there, and it does seem to work. Seems to work okay. There's just a couple of things. The HT voltage I'm using on the 807s is about 700 volts. On the anodes, screen voltage about 270 volts, and yeah, that's about it. So I think what we need to do is perhaps power up the modulator, and I can give you a demonstration. What we'll do is we'll power up the transmitter and the modulator and stick it into a dummy load and have a look at what the output's like on an oscilloscope. So I've got the modulator and the transmitter powered up, and I think what we'll try and do is inject a signal from my Chinese SIG Jenny, 1 kilohertz, 900 volts RMS, into the modulator, and then we'll see what sort of pattern we get with the scope. So let's set that up and see what happens. So let's just give this a whirl and see what happens. So we'll transmit. So that's the carrier, and I will switch the SIG Jenny on and then slowly bring it up. I'll just see if we can steady that. So that is probably about 50% modulation. Now if I bring it up even more, you'll see it's starting to distort, and that is probably about the best I can do with this modulator. And you're probably saying, well, that's pretty crap, you should be getting 100% modulation. Well, that is probably true. I'll just switch that off. But you have to bear in mind that this 807 modulator, and also the original modulator that the LG300 uses, which is actually used as a pair of 6146s, you have to bear in mind that the plate voltage on the primary, on the anodes of your modulating tubes, is certainly a lot less than the plate voltage of your 813. So the 807s here are using approximately, I'll just have a quick focus down there. So those 807s, they've got 700 volts on the anodes compared to 1300 volts on the, which is going through the secondary of that modulation transformer. So you know you're not going to get 100% modulation. And I think the experience from other people with LG300s is that generally with the modulators on there, you're unlikely to get 100% mod. Having said that, the reports I'm getting on the air with this, actually the audio sounds pretty good. So you can actually have, make yourself heard with this level of modulation. So I mean, if you wanted to improve things, I guess you'd probably want to increase the power of the modulator, and I think maybe with a few tweaks I can probably do that with this, but this is basically as I've built it, and as I said, it does work. It's not 100%, but I'm reasonably happy with it, and the reports I'm getting are being pretty okay. So folks, that's the 807 modulator for the LabGear LG300, and what we're going to do next time is we're going to finish off boxing everything up. I've got to repaint one of the cabinets or boxes for the power supply, and then Got to try and find a home for all this lot, and then we'll see if we can get a QSO. So until then, thanks for watching and see you again next time.